understand the weird existential crisis the GOP finds itself in with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket, look no further than this guy. Trump endorsing Republican Congressman Darrell Issa of California, former car alarm magnate, who, when he was chair of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, led investigations into the Benghazi attack, the IRS targeting conservatives, pseudo-scandal, and the ATF's so-called fast and furious gun sting. In 2010, Issa called President Obama one of the most corrupt presidents in modern times, 2 years into his administration, later amending that comment to say that Obama leads, quote, the most corrupt government in history. Which is why people thought it was a little bit strange when Issa, seen here heartily shaking Trump's hand back in May, recently sent out this mailer saying he's, quote, very pleased the president signed legislation to provide sexual assault victims legal protections that Issa had co-sponsored. That's the same president Issa tried and failed to destroy, and whose approval rating last week hit 57%. Issa cruised to victory by an average of nearly 30 points in his past 8 elections, but this year he's in a tight race against Democratic newcomer Doug Applegate in a district that Mitt Romney won by just 6 points back in 2012. And at a fundraiser last night, Obama described Issa's decision to embrace him as shameless. Quote, Issa's primary contribution to the United States Congress has been to obstruct and to waste taxpayer dollars on trumped-up investigations that have led nowhere. And this is now a guy who, because poll numbers are bad, has sent out brochures with my picture on them, touting his cooperation on issues with me. Now that is the definition of chutzpah. Joining me now, MSNBC contributor Josh Barrow, senior editor at Business Insider, former Reagan official and syndicated columnist Linda Chavez. Josh, let me go to you first on this, because the Darrell Issa is two things. It's one, the political problems that down-ballot Republicans are worried about. But also, it's like, what is the Republican Party in 2016? What are you voting for? What are you getting when you vote for this party in 2016?
It's funny because usually people talk about a three-legged stool of conservatism. It's economic conservatives, social conservatives, foreign policy conservatives. Trump has sort of kicked out all 3 legs of the stool. He's, you know, does not run on social issues at all. It's not at all clear that if you're a serious social conservative, he's your guy. He's abandoned the conservative positions on trade, the economic aspects of immigration, doesn't really talk about taxes very much, doesn't embrace the Bush vision of foreign policy, says Bush made all these failures in his administration. So if you take away all the policy stuff, all you have left is sort of this anger. And that's what Donald Trump has run on. And it's left the down-ballot candidates a little bit awash as well.
Right, because, Linda, this is the thing. Like, in 2012, I mean, the Ryan budget was this sort of manifesto in certain ways, and it was more than a manifesto, right? It was an operational document that was actually a plan for what the priorities were, and they got attacked over it, and I, for one, was not a big fan of it. But it was a thing that was, this is what the Republican Party is. I just don't even understand what that case is in 2016.
Well, I think that's the big question. And the real question is going to be, what is the Republican Party going to be on November 9th? After the election is over, after Trump, if the polls are correct, does not become our president, then the Republican Party is going to have to decide whether it's going to go back to that 3-legged stool that Josh talked about. And certainly on some key issues such as trade, economic issues, foreign policy, it's going to be very, very tough because Trump represents people who have grievances, they feel like they're victims, and they like to promote their, white national identity. They don't represent ideas or a platform that can be cohesive for a party.
Well, an ethno-nationalist mini-state for white people is an idea. It's a bad idea, but it is an idea. I mean, this is the problem, right? If you ask Republicans, who represents the views of the party, Donald Trump 51%, Paul Ryan 33%, like, it's sort of in the nature, maybe in the heat of this kind of election, that the titular head of the party, insofar as he's the nominee, is the one that lays down the marker for what it is, but it's not operationalizable for any of these other candidates.
A lot of people have been pointing to that number as something that's really alarming for Paul Ryan because it shows a majority of the party siding against him, but it's also really alarming for Donald Trump's vision of the party because, sort of to your point about white nationalism being a thing, as the demographics of the country have changed, some people have looked at that and said, well, if you could win 70% of the white vote, then you could still win elections, even with fewer whites. The problem is that white people have all sorts of ideological diversity on things, which which is why, for example, there are a lot of white people.
Thank God they do.
Who like Social Security and Medicare a lot. And that's one of the reasons that Donald Trump has de-emphasized entitlement cuts. And it's helped him do well in places like Youngstown, Ohio, where you have a lot of white voters who are not really conservative on economics but don't like the way the country's been changing. The problem is if you shed that 33% of the party, the people who really did care about that ideology, that's people like in Darrell Iss's district, which is a wealthy suburban district in California. You have a lot of those wealthy, educated, professional Republicans who really were in the party for the ideology. So you can't build a majority coalition around the Ryan ideas. You also can't build a majority coalition around the Trump identity politics.
And then you end up, Linda, with all these folks who sort of caught between first and second base with a lead that was too large and trying to get back to the base. Mike Crapo, the U.S. Senator who had endorsed Trump, unendorsed him after that tape came out, is now is re-endorsing him, I guess, or going to vote for him. And all those folks are going to have to kind of wear that after whatever happens on Election Day.
I think that's really a problem. It's become a kind of revolving door, and you don't know when they're actually going to come out and be where they are eventually going to be. I mean, they just keep flip-flopping, and I think that's always bad for a politician. There's nothing worse for a politician than to be pegged as somebody who doesn't stand firm on the issue. So, frankly, I think they're really losing by this strategy.
Yeah, standing firm on alternate days. Josh Barrow and Linda Chavez, thank you both for